Welcome everyone to week 5. I look forward to another week in the class. It's going by quick, but I think we're going to be covering a lot of good ground. This week we're going to start shifting more into the another phase of the career development field, and we're going to be moving from trait and factor theory to developmental theories of career development. So I think it's a paradigm shift. It's the kind of the core philosophy, the core approach to what is career counseling doing, why are we helping clients, what are we helping them achieve. Those questions start to be a little bit different based on these different approaches. So I'm really excited to see your thoughts as we start to shift this direction. A few just announcements before we jump into that in more detail, though. The career assessment. So many of you have already filled out the Myers-Briggs type indicator and the strong interest inventory, and I've sent you those results via email. If you haven't done that already, please do so soon as you prepare for your autobiography assignment next month. You'll need those results to integrate into your paper. So yeah, feel free to email me once you've completed those assessments. I'll kind of check periodically, but if you email me, that'll kind of prompt me to know that your results are there waiting. All right, so the discussion posts, I wanted to follow up on that really quick as well. I think we're having great discussions, asking each other questions, continuing to, delve into these topics well. So I appreciate those conversations. I think there was a little bit of confusion about differentiation or being differentiated in your interests and undifferentiated when it came to the Holland theory. So I'm going to share my screen really quick and talk about this briefly. I think it's probably pretty clear by this point, but just wanted to take a brief moment to discuss it. So here, got to move my face around a little bit. Okay, so here is the hexagon, so the RIASEC, and that order of those letters is very important. So RIASEC. So basically, Holland was saying that you are differentiated if, let's say, you are an SAI, because these codes are touching each other, they're closer, so it means that there's a little bit more of an overlap, and the interests intertwine a little bit easier. And sometimes, the assumption is in Holland's approach is that a lot of career environments, they're often, differentiated. So the environment is a social environment. So if you're a counselor, you're in an environment where you're working with people. So those needs and interests are being met in your career environment. But the one example that I gave in the written lecture was that, sometimes I actually kind of got this idea from someone else, but the idea of a university professor where there's social interests, but then there's also, investigative interests of doing research. And depending on your field, there can be if you're an accounting professor, yeah, you're teaching and helping people, you're doing research, but then the conventional type is often connected with accounting, of being very data-driven, detail-oriented with numbers and kind of being very meticulous and following a pattern and structure. So that would be much more of an undifferentiated career type. So your interests are kind of in very different, the distance from each other is pretty different, and separate from one another. I think that's kind of the point. So I think the clearest way to look at this is if someone was an A and a C, especially if those were their two highest and the codes were pretty high, they scored pretty high on both of those, that would be pretty unique. Because an artistic individual is obviously, someone who values creativity, kind of thinking outside the box, not really wanting to structure, wanting to kind of think of new possibilities and to not really have a clear, defined path forward. Conventional is much more organized, structured, wanting to follow tradition, wanting to follow rules. So to have both of those and to find a career environment where both of those are honored might be kind of difficult, because, they're kind of seen, I don't know if opposites is the right word, but they're very different from one another. So once again, differentiated means that, I think the words is where it gets kind of confusing, but differentiated is where, there's clear difference, so if I'm social and artistic, those are close to one another. They're different from the other codes that are farther from it. Undifferentiated is where there's no clear type. There's no clear one environment that'll work. So artistic and conventional, it's spanning a large set of interests. So if there's more questions about that, feel free to reach out. Hopefully that helped a little bit. But yeah, I think that's worth, clarifying and understanding, because sometimes that can be why, clients are really struggling is because their difference are just, or excuse me, their interests are just so different. They're undifferentiated. So it's hard to find an environment. It's hard to find like a life space, a life, climate where all those different competing interests and needs can be met. So that's where sometimes there can be that friction and not feeling like they feel whole or complete, is because it's hard to find that balance. All right, I get excited talking about these things. I get rolling, get going. Okay, just one more thing with the discussion posts is I want to encourage you and challenge you to in a lot of the posts, I'm asking you to kind of apply the understanding to a client. Particularly this week, that's going to be very clear because you're going to be doing a case example or creating a case. So especially this week, but in future weeks too, I want to invite you to keep thinking of like, how does this theory apply to an actual client? Just start to kind of wrestle and chew on that of like, what does this mean, whether you're in the mental health counseling track or the school counseling track, or, maybe if you're interested in career counseling at some point in your career, like what does it mean on a practical level? And maybe you're like, I don't know, that's what I need to learn. But I think part of that learning is like trying to envision that, trying to explore possibilities based on your experience up to this point. And I'll try to keep giving examples to share with that, but keep really maybe emphasizing and giving a little bit more, writing to those portions of the prompts. Because I think that'll kind of help translate the theory to practice. Okay. All right, now I'm not gonna go into a lot of detail with Super and Gottfredson in this video, because I did that in the written lecture and in the text that goes into that. So this actually might be a good time to pause this video if you haven't looked at the written lecture yet or read through anything from the textbook, and go look at that, because I'm going to assume that you have certain pieces of that already understood. So yeah, if you haven't done that already, pause, come back. Okay, briefly, I want to go over an example. This might help with the case example for the discussion post for this week, but I'm going to try to integrate 3 theories. So hopefully this makes sense. I was hoping that I had pictures of this, but I actually don't have them anymore. They're on my phone, but my last phone got destroyed. I walked into a pool with it. So a while back, about a year ago, my son was starting kindergarten, and we were doing homeschool. Just with the pandemic and everything, we're doing homeschool. So one thing that I'd always been kind of chewing on and thinking would be really cool is to bring career development into like more of an elementary school space. And how I thought to do that would be really cool would be to like use the Holland codes. So the 6, RIASEC codes or types. And basically, so I got trained quite a bit in play therapy in my PhD program. So set up 6 different stations based on the RIASEC codes. And just with like play stations, not the electronic console, but play therapy stations. So yeah, one was the realistic, investigative, artistic, social, enterprising, and conventional. Obviously, I didn't go into that at all, but I just put toys. So for realistic, I'd put hammers, like little toy hammers where they could like pound on things. Some of them were even just like costumes of maybe like a firefighter, so people who are just like using their hands, who are in the environment. So I tried to collect toys that kind of spoke to that realistic code. Did the same thing for investigative. We had like a little science experiment for that area, for that station. Just like obviously like, just I think it was like baking soda and vinegar or something like that, just to kind of talk about, oh, there's experience. Why is this? To kind of start asking those why questions that kind of a child might be interested in, and so on and so forth. So like with artistic, kind of finding that creative element, maybe having some like musical instruments, some easels to write on, color on, to be creative. So I did that for every single one of the codes, and then just kind of showed them each one like, oh, here's where you can play here, you can play here, and here's kind of how you might do it. And then we just kind of let, so as my son in homeschool, as well as like a couple friends who then came over, and all the kids just went wherever they wanted. They gravitated to those stations that were interesting to them. They kind of went to each one of them, but then it was interesting that they kind of like stayed in certain ones longer than others. So like, I'm not trying to predict that, oh, because they were coloring that, or, they were in that artistic, that they'll be artistic later on. But the goal was, and this is where I want to kind of bring in elements of Gottfredson and super, is that I think this kind of helped with stage 1 of circumscription. So that orientation to size and power. So they might just feel like, if they didn't have this play experience, they might just feel like, only big people can use hammers, or that's not safe for me. I'm always told no, that I can't. But this gave them an opportunity through play, through safe play, to experience and explore, to be curious. That goes to super. So that curiosity, encouraging that curiosity, and then moving to exploration. So trying out that curiosity. So I think play can be a really important way for kids to, experience and develop these kind of foundational elements of career without even needing to talk about career paths. It's just kind of trying out possibilities. The same with like sex roles. So if there's certain careers that might just assume like, oh, female or male, or like, kind of certain occupations that are only for a certain gender, this, I think, play, having like a small group of kids to just like try out every single area. And that's why I kind of showed them every once. So they kind of knew what the different toys were, or the different, experiences and activities were at each of those stations, and they could try whatever they want. So it was kind of, allowing them to try out behaviors that they might see key figures of, male, female. It didn't matter at that point. They could experience and explore it. And so once again, the key figures has to do with the super element. And social valuation. I think it was important that the group was small. So it wasn't like, too many kids might have been like, oh, there's lots of kids at this one, I want to go see what that one is. So the small group, I think, was important, because then they could all just kind of come together here and there at certain stations, but also just kind of not feel super influenced to just like, oh, everyone's there. So they could kind of try out whatever they wanted. So I feel like that small play therapy setting, or place, play station, play career station, I think helped them, once again, be able to just explore openly without kind of needing to follow like the herd, I guess is what's going by, the herd of children. And then the orientation to internal unique self. I think, to what extent was this like actually like in my mind at the time? Not at all, honestly. But my main goal was to encourage interests, the development of interests, like Super talked about. So, play, I think, is, at least according to certain play therapy approaches, play is children's first language. That's how they communicate their inner experience in the world. So it's not just about fun, it's about, how do I express what is going on inside me? So I think this play at an early age with these kids was opening them up to career possibilities, but also just developing what is interesting to me. What do I enjoy? And I think that lays the foundation through like these play and exploration and curiosity experiences to developing one's self-concept later on. So yeah, I wasn't having the end goal of like, oh, you'll play with this for 45 minutes and then you'll have a self-concept. No, but I think it's a small incremental buildup to that self-concept. So anyways, these are just some ideas. This is one idea of how I did just use the Holland codes in a play therapy setting with young children. Some of them were only 3 that were involved, and others were like 6. So it's really cool to kind of see, just at really a young age, they're loving it. They're just like, it was all about play, but the play was organized based on a career development theory. And, based on super, like elements of Super's approach, elements of Gottfredson's approach were like a part of that. So this week, when you're developing your cases, be thinking about what's a principle from either Super or Gottfredson that really stands out to me that I think might apply to a setting, maybe apply to something that I'm interested in, or a client population that I'm interested in working in. And how might that apply? How can I create an intervention? Once again, intervention doesn't have to be super scripted and organized. It could just be like, how does an intervention kind of how can I conceptualize an intervention based on this principle from Gottfredson or Super? You just need to choose one. But I tried to throw out several examples with this play therapy station experience. So anyways, if you have questions about this or about the discussion, I'd be happy to chat about that, but I look forward to hearing your thoughts. And this is just like, don't expect perfection of yourselves with kind of developing this case. You don't have to be, it's just kind of initial explorations for you, just kind of making sense of like, how might this apply? So if it feels kind of like, this is challenging, I'm not really sure where to start, that's okay. This is starting, we're giving it a shot. So this video, once again, is probably way longer than I anticipated it to be, but that's what happens sometimes. All right, I look forward to reading in your discussion posts and learning with you. So reach out if you need anything. Thanks.